friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Leah and I'm the Redheaded Witch. The last conversation we had was the occulty conversation that I participated in with Joanna and Ella Harrison here on YouTube. It was really enlightening to see kind of the response that we received of fellow occultists, practitioners, folks from so many different walks of life and different paths. And just these different perspectives is really enlightening to kind of hear what others had to say, kind of some of the things that they wanted to shine light on and focus on related to some of the things that were rising up within the community space, specifically how social media was influencing folks who are practitioners and also share their practice online, and how witchcraft is being perceived online. So this conversation was something that when I decided to kind of like participate with Ella and Joanna, I had no idea to what extent this conversation would go, like how far it would go. And it was really great to see like the engagement in terms of like how many folks feel seen and heard, and then also given an opportunity to kind of like you know, say their 2 cents and kind of use their own voice and use their own platform to respond. So that was really cool. Not gonna lie though, it also kind of like validated a lot of the things that I was already kind of feeling or experiencing personally, especially with my relationship to social media. As someone who uses social media, not someone who creates, but just how I use social media, I really started to kind of reassess my relationship with it, like how I was using it and how I was engaging with it. And I had decided a while ago to kind of decrease my social media usage, mainly on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, just like the short, quick, video formats. I just found that I felt really overwhelmed when I was using social media, like not creating content, but just like engaging with it as a user. So I decided to kind of take a step back. And that kind of, you know, trickled down into creating content as well. Kind of find myself like not really inspired to make short form content, and would either not post for weeks or kind of forget. And I really started to put my time and energy into fostering like the things that were really bringing me joy lately. And after the occulty conversation, I really took my time to nurture those things outside of like a digital space. And what that ended up looking like was finding some new hobbies, reigniting passion for old hobbies, meeting new friends, which if you're new around here, I recently relocated to the Pacific Northwest, so I've only been here for just over 2 years now, and so meeting new people is, you know, that gets increasingly hard the older you get. I've just been like in this space to kind of nurture things offline, and I think that was probably the best decision I made for myself, not only as, you know, as a practitioner, but also just like as a creator, because when I moved from Western North Carolina to the Pacific Northwest, I have shared kind of like my journey of localizing my practice more here and rooting it more here. Last fall, my husband and I took a trip back to Western North Carolina as like kind of like a moment for us to really close that chapter of our lives and being able to move forward. Since that had happened, I felt like I was really struggling with imposter syndrome, and I kind of talked about this in occulty a little bit, but this is kind of like a different type of imposter syndrome. I was feeling really lost as like a person and like how I identified, because being like a Pacific Northwest transplant, like people know that you're not from here. I'm still learning how to accurately pronounce the towns and the cities. I'm still getting to know like the weather patterns here. I'm still just like getting accustomed to like the different behaviors here and everything like that. It is different. It's so much more different than where I grew up in many ways. So I felt like when I visited my hometown last fall, like I no longer could identify as someone who was from Southern Appalachia. Like, I had no association with it. It didn't define me. I am a new person. I relocated. And if you've moved, I'm sure you have felt similar, where you're like, new beginning, new me. And you kind of want to like take on this like completely new persona and this new like phase of your life. And I felt like I was trying to do that while completely discarding my past and everything that I had learned and acquired from living in Western North Carolina, growing up there. And so I felt like I was having a little bit of an identity crisis because I didn't feel like I could fit in anywhere. And this really wasn't coming from any sort of outside source. This was completely internal, of just like what was happening in my world and how it was being reflected in my practice. And I felt really disconnected because if you've been following me for a while, you know my practice is centered around ancestral veneration. And I felt immense guilt, one, moving away from my hometown, because my family has resided in Southern Appalachia for centuries. And I felt immense guilt of just, I felt like I was kind of like abandoning it and running away from like my own kind of problems and just experiences that town had held for me. And so because I was running away from this part of myself, it just kind of like stunted my growth. I don't really know how to explain it because I'm still reckoning with this and working through it. Kind of like this grief of choosing to move away from my hometown. And I have no regrets. I think it was the best thing for me personally. I think it has like really opened up some doors that perhaps wouldn't have opened if I had stayed. So there's no regret there. But I think like as someone, as a person, sorry, our dumpster at our apartment complex is here. But just like trying to figure out my place in the world and how I show up in places, like I felt sad to kind of leave her behind, and or kind of like abandoning her in some ways. I mean, I think this is what winter was really teaching me, because I visited my hometown in the fall, and then winter season came, and winter season is always a time for me to really look within. And then we had a occult tea conversation, and now it's spring and summer and things are starting to bloom. And so I have found myself being able to accept parts of myself that I was really wanting to kind of leave behind or deny or not take along with me, because I was like afraid that it would things would always be the same, or I would stunt my own growth or whatever it was. But just like this fear of like, you know, I don't want to be this person anymore. I want to be someone new. And I don't know, it just like, that just like wasn't working for me. It just wasn't working. And I talked through that a lot in therapy, and it was interesting because like, where was this imposter syndrome coming from of, you know, kind of owning my identity of where I came from and where my roots were from. So that was really interesting to work through in those spaces. But what ended up coming from like this reckoning with myself and, you know, who I am and how I show up is just being able to own my identity and own where I come from and be proud of it, because it has morphed me into the person that I am today and continues to deliver lessons that I find really valuable, and some reminders too. And I feel like instead of abandoning my childhood or the place that I grew up, like I can take that with me. And I read something in a book that really validated for me. John Rader's, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, Appalachian Folkways. And as someone who centers their practice around ancestral veneration, and growing up in Southern Appalachia, like it is a place that is near and dear to my heart. It is a part of me. It always is a part of me. And I read something at the beginning here, in the midst of feeling this identity crisis, that I just like needed to hear in this moment. And this is what it says. If adults raised in Appalachia move to other regions in the United States, are they still Appalachian? Yes, I believe so. Once people learn their culture, they retain some of its original traits, even though they accept traits from a new host culture. It was just a reminder that I didn't have to abandon a part of myself. I needed to hear that. I needed to feel that. And I accepted that for myself. I started to share more of myself with people, like in full transparency. And one of the topics that we talked about in the occult tea conversation was like authenticity. And I had a lot of like feelings about that and how I wanted to show up, because I think for a long time, like I associate authenticity with how much someone shows of themselves, like their hardships, mainly like their struggles and hardships. I feel like more people do that now because we've come to a place in life where we're more understanding and empathetic. So it creates like this safe environment for folks to do that. But I also was really tentative and shy away from sharing those parts of myself, because in the past that has always been used against me in other areas of my life. So I was really shy about it. So then I was like, well, what is authenticity while still owning my boundaries of sharing certain things, especially in online spaces? And I came to the realization that like authenticity is like owning your entirety. So I know I've kind of talked a lot about this identity crisis that I was experiencing these last few months. But I felt like it was important to talk about, because as someone who moved across the country, moved away from their childhood, home state, and hometown, there comes a lot of grief, and there's ups and there's downs. And one of, my dearest friends from high school recently moved away. She moved back and then she moved away. Closer, well, I say closer, but not really closer, but on the other side as well. And we have these conversations all the time. We talk about the grief that comes with it. We talk about the homesickness that comes with it. You just never truly forget. And that goes for anywhere, like just moving away from your childhood home state that you've known forever and starting something new. It is terrifying. There have been moments when I feel like maybe we made the wrong choice. We made the wrong decision. This was stupid. What are we doing? And those moments are going to come and go. But I felt like this was an important conversation to talk about and to kind of share, because it's going to be reflected in how I show up in these spaces and what I decide to talk about, and kind of showing up more of who I am and all the pieces that make up who I am. But if you relate to this, like, I love to hear it, especially if you're from like the region, and if you've moved away, like how you feel about moving away. Do you have intentions moving back? Whereabout like you're from. And I'm excited to talk more about Southern Appalachia and kind of owning my roots and what that looks like and how that has reflected in my practice over the years. In light of that too, and kind of like figuring out how I wanted to show up in terms of like social media and the spaces, I really decided to kind of put my time and energy into long form content. So that will be here on YouTube. But also on my Patreon, I decided to revive that. I am working through book number 2 right now, and so I'm in a good place, and I feel like I have the spoons to be able to nurture Patreon more. I really wanted it to be a space for like-minded folks who are interested in Southern Appalachian folk practices, wanting to kind of learn more about it. So I'm really excited to share more in depth over in that space. There is an option to be a free member. From time to time, I will have some free posts. Like if I feel like, it's not something that I particularly want to paywall or anything like that. And I kind of just like want to share like with community members. So there is an option, there is a free option. And then there are 4 different tiers depending on what you are most interested in. So if you are interested in just having the weekly kind of community check-ins with tarot and oracle, as well as the journal prompts, there is the charm journal tier. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of diving into Appalachian folk practices, specifically in the southern central region where I'm from, there is a second tier, and that will be like a monthly article where we dive into something. June's article is going to be the Appalachian Devil, and I am so excited for that one. The devil is a complex figure within Appalachian culture, and so we're going to be diving into that, and that will probably be more than one article because there's just so much. And then the next tier is Mama's Book of Spells. I was inspired by that because grandmothers or grandparents were often the ones who shared a lot of their charms and practices with the younger generation. And so that's kind of how I decided to name that tier. But so that tier is specifically for folks who want like an in-depth kind of closer look into workings and charms, as well as folk crafting. As I mentioned, like during kind of like the last few months, I have been really diving into some hobbies that are inspired by Southern Appalachian culture, and one of them is quilting. Needle crafting, quilting, sewing, embroidery is a great way to incorporate magic, and so you will see a lot of that kind of reflected into that tier. Thank you so much for being here and bearing witness to kind of like my reckoning of my identity and talking through that a little bit, even in this space. Sometimes talking about it externally helps. That's why we're in therapy. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one.